Imagine living for decades believing that the war never ended, while the world around you had long since moved on. Hiro Onoda, a lieutenant in the Japanese army, played a role in one of the most extraordinary stories of World War II. While Japan was rebuilding and living in peace, Onoda remained hidden in the forests of the Philippines, trapped in a reality that no longer existed. He did not know that the conflict had ended in 1945 and continued faithfully carrying out his mission for nearly 3 decades. This raises a crucial question. How far can a soldier's determination and loyalty to a cause go? For Onoda, reality was different, and attempts to inform him that the conflict had ended seemed to him merely traps set by his enemies. Time passed, but he remained steadfast, living through a challenge that had already been overcome by the rest of the world. His story makes us reflect on the impact of unfinished missions and what that can mean in anyone's life. Ready to dive into this incredible journey of isolation, resistance, and perhaps stubbornness? If this story surprised you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover other narratives that may change your view of the world. Did you know? Few people know, but Hiro Onoda lived through a unique situation. He spent 29 years in hiding, thinking the war was still going on. In the midst of the Philippine jungle, he continued to follow orders given in 1944, when he received the mission to carry out guerrilla operations and never surrender. Even after Japan's official surrender in 1945, Onoda continued to believe his mission was still in force. This blind loyalty led him into deep isolation, mistrusting any attempt at contact, thinking it was all part of an enemy plan. During all this time, Onoda and his guerrilla comrades faced the difficult challenge of survival. Hunting, stealing provisions from local residents, and avoiding any contact with the outside world, the group endured, while the rest of the planet was moving forward into post-war reconstruction. Onoda symbolizes not just a rare dedication, but also the portrait of many soldiers who, even after the end of the conflict, were still fighting inner battles. Onoda's story teaches us that time can be an invisible enemy. He stayed true to his mission for nearly 3 decades, while life outside moved on. His story is a powerful reminder of how unquestioning loyalty can keep us trapped in outdated realities. Onoda's military history. Hiro Onoda was born in Japan in 1922, and at 20 years old, he was drafted into the Imperial Japanese Army. He quickly received specialized training in guerrilla tactics, skills that would be essential for his survival in the years to come. In 1944, already in the later stages of the war, Onoda was assigned to the island of Lubang in the Philippines. His mission was clear: prevent the enemy's advance, destroy airstrips, and never surrender, no matter the cost. Japan's surrender in 1945 was not enough to change Onoda's conviction. He believed that the announcement of the surrender was a hoax created by the enemy and continued his guerrilla mission alongside a few comrades. The Philippine jungle became the setting for a silent resistance, where they remained hidden and followed the instructions of a command that, in practice, no longer existed. Onoda's case reveals the power of military conditioning and the intensity of the global conflicts of that time. Soldiers like him, trained to follow orders without question, lived in parallel realities, far from understanding that the war was already history. The fight they were waging was no longer against the enemy, but against time and ignorance. Attempts at communication and surrender. Several attempts were made to inform Hiro Onoda that the war had ended. Leaflets were dropped from planes, explaining Japan's surrender, and even personal letters from Onoda's family reached the island, begging him to return home. However, Onoda believed that everything was a trap by the enemy, a strategy to capture him or force him to surrender. His obstinacy was such that he and his comrades refused to believe any message that didn't come directly from a superior officer. They lived in hiding, stealing food from local farms, always avoiding contact with the island's inhabitants. For Onoda, the end of the war was unimaginable without an official order. Every leaflet, every attempt at communication was seen as a psychological warfare tactic. This prolonged resistance, even in the face of clear evidence, shows us how perception of reality can turn into a prison. Onoda continued his mission without understanding that the situation had completely changed. This solitary fight against an invisible enemy reflects a psychological dilemma faced by many soldiers. How do you abandon a mission when it becomes part of your identity? Curious to know more? Leave a like and comment below what you thought of Hiro Onoda's incredible journey. We want to hear your opinion. Losses and loneliness. Over the years, Onoda saw his guerrilla comrades fall. One by one, they were captured or killed until he was left completely alone, lost in the jungle and in his convictions. His last companion, Kozuka, was killed in 1954 by Filipino forces. Since then, Onoda continued alone, sustaining a private war that seemed to have no end. Even as time eroded his hopes of reintegration, Onoda remained faithful to his mission. For him, survival depended on the belief that, one day, the Japanese army would return to rescue him. This stubbornness kept him detached from reality and trapped in a cycle of solitary survival, in a war that no longer existed for anyone except him. Onoda's story reflects the loneliness of many war veterans, who even after the end of conflicts, face internal battles difficult to overcome. The loss of his guerrilla comrades only reinforced his mission, leading him into a state of almost total isolation, both physically and psychologically. The encounter with Norio Suzuki. In 1974, Onoda's life took an unexpected turn. A young Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki decided to embark on an improbable mission to find Hiro Onoda, a giant panda, and the abominable snowman. To everyone's surprise, Suzuki found Onoda just 4 days after arriving on Lubang Island. It was a surreal encounter in which Onoda, still on guard, refused to believe that the war had ended. Suzuki managed to gain Onoda's trust, but the lieutenant was adamant. He would only surrender if he received a direct order from his superior. Determined to help Onoda, Suzuki returned to Japan and brought Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, the officer who had given Onoda orders in 1944. This encounter was decisive in ending Onoda's long war. Suzuki's incredible journey reveals the power of human connection. He accomplished what no one else had been able to: convince Onoda to believe that the war had indeed ended. It was a bridge between the past and the present, between a mission and reality. The final order and return to Japan. In March 1974, Hiro Onoda finally surrendered after receiving the order directly from his superior. Dressed in his uniform, impeccably preserved after so many years, he handed his sword to the Filipino authorities. The soldier who had spent 29 years believing he was still fighting in a war that had already ended, now returned home. Upon his return to Japan, Onoda was received with a mixture of honor and controversy. Many saw him as a symbol of loyalty and discipline, while others questioned whether all that resistance had really been necessary. In front of a modern, technological society, Onoda struggled to adjust. Years later, he moved to Brazil, where he lived until his death in 2014. Onoda's story makes us reflect on how a mission, when not closed at the right time, can imprison us. His extraordinary journey reminds us that sometimes it's necessary to know when to leave the past behind and move forward. Can you imagine dedicating your entire life to a cause that no longer exists? Hiro Onoda's story serves as a profound reminder of how excess loyalty and determination, especially when left unchecked, can become both a blessing and a curse. His unwavering commitment to his mission is a testament to the strength of human resolve. But it also highlights the dangers of holding on to outdated beliefs and fighting battles that no longer serve a purpose. Onoda spent 29 years in the jungle, living as if the world had frozen in time, while everything and everyone around him moved forward. His loyalty was not just to his country, but to an idea, a mission, and a sense of duty that had long since become obsolete. Yet this very sense of duty shaped his identity, so much so that abandoning it would have been unthinkable for him. His extraordinary journey teaches us that while loyalty and perseverance are admirable qualities, they must also be tempered with adaptability and an openness to changing circumstances. Otherwise, like Onoda, we may find ourselves trapped in a reality that no longer exists, waging personal wars that were long over for everyone else. The isolation he experienced for nearly 3 decades reflects a universal human struggle. How many of us continue to carry old wounds, burdens, or responsibilities that no longer have a place in our present lives? Onoda's experience serves as a mirror, challenging us to evaluate whether we are still fighting battles that should have ended long ago. Are we holding on to old missions, old goals, or past grievances when perhaps the wisest thing to do is to let go and embrace the new possibilities that life offers? Onoda's eventual surrender was not just the end of his physical mission, but a symbolic release of the mental and emotional burden he had carried for so long. When he finally handed over his sword, he was not just giving up a fight. He was acknowledging the passing of time, the end of an era, and his need to return to a world that had moved on without him. His